The polished mahogany conference table at Patterson, Wells and Associates reflected the harsh overhead lights as attorney Victoria Patterson reviewed the case files laid out before her. Each manila folder represented another marriage she would methodically dismantle, another family she would tear apart with clinical precision. At just 34, Victoria had earned her reputation as Chicago's most ruthless divorce attorney, specializing in high-conflict cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. "This one's particularly interesting," said her paralegal, Jennifer, sliding a thick file toward her. "Interracial couple, married 8 years, 2 kids. The wife's seeking full custody and claims the husband's family has been openly hostile toward her." Victoria's lips curled into something resembling a smile. Mixed marriages always come with built-in fault lines, cultural clashes, family disapproval, social tensions. Makes it easier for us to document patterns of incompatibility. She flipped open the file, examining photographs of Marcus Henderson, a successful black architect, and his white wife, Sarah, a pediatric nurse. They looked blissful in their wedding photos, but Victoria knew how to find the fractures time and stress inevitably created. Even in the most idealistic unions, "Schedule a consultation with Mrs. Henderson for tomorrow," she instructed, "and run a full background check on the husband. I want financial records, employment history, social media, the works." Interracial marriages already face enough pressure without us having to invent problems. Victoria's corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering $1 million view, one she'd earned through 15 relentless years of turning divorce cases into scorched earth campaigns. Her phone buzzed, and her assistant's voice came through. "Ms. Patterson, your mother's on line 3. Suppressing a sigh, Victoria picked up. "Hello, Mother." "Victoria, darling," came the familiar, overly polished voice. "I do hope you're still planning to attend the country club fundraiser next weekend. The Whitfields specifically asked about you, and I promised you'd be there." "I'll be there," Victoria replied, though charity events with her mother's social circle had begun to feel increasingly hollow. "There's a reason." "Of course," her mother continued. "Their son Jonathan is recently divorced, a surgeon at Northwestern. Quite suitable. I told them you'd make a wonderful match." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of a lifetime of expectations settle on her shoulders. At 62, Eleanor Patterson still believed her daughter's greatest accomplishment should be marrying well, rather than building one of Chicago's most successful divorce firms. "Mother, I'm focused on my career right now. Marriage isn't a priority." "Nonsense, dear. You're 34 and accomplished. It's time to think about a husband and children before it's too late. Your biological clock won't wait forever." After ending the call, Victoria returned to the Henderson file, studying the family photographs with cold detachment. Marcus and Sarah Henderson had once believed love alone could overcome society's barriers, cultural divides, family prejudice, social judgment. They were naive. Victoria had built a career on that very naivety. She knew interracial marriages faced unique pressures, disapproving relatives, community scrutiny, cultural miscommunications, and the relentless strain of living in a world determined to test them. And when those marriages eventually fractured under the weight, Victoria was there to turn their unraveling into lucrative victories for her clients. "Jennifer," she called out, "what's our success rate on interracial divorce cases?" 80% favorable outcomes for our clients, Jennifer answered without hesitation. "You're especially effective at highlighting cultural incompatibility and family conflict." Victoria gave a satisfied nod. She'd learned to weaponize the very real challenges interracial couples faced, turning their struggles with prejudice and misunderstanding into legal leverage. It was calculated, cynical, and wildly effective, and it had made her one of the wealthiest attorneys in the city. Her computer chimed with an email from the Illinois State Bar Association, a mandatory continuing education notice. Cultural Competency in Family Law, taught by Dr. David Washington, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in multicultural relationships. Victoria almost deleted it without reading. She had no patience for cultural competency seminars that lectured about sensitivity and inclusivity. But it would check a required box, and it might offer an opportunity to network with other family law attorneys. She signed up without glancing at the course details, unaware that Dr. Washington had spent the last decade developing therapeutic programs aimed at helping interracial couples navigate the precise challenges Victoria exploited for profit. As she packed up for the evening, Victoria cast one last glance at the Henderson photographs. Tomorrow, she would begin unraveling another marriage, using race and cultural differences as tools to secure a financial advantage for her client. It wasn't personal, it was business. And Victoria Patterson was very, very good at business. The next morning, Victoria Patterson sat across from Sarah Henderson in the firm's client consultation. Room A space, carefully curated to radiate power and success. The walls displayed Victoria's law degrees, prestigious awards, and framed photos of her alongside Chicago's political elite. Every detail of the room was designed to reassure clients they had chosen the perfect attorney to dismantle their spouse's life. Mrs. Henderson, I've reviewed the preliminary details you submitted, Victoria began, her voice carrying the crisp, authoritative edge that unnerved opposing counsel. Let's talk about the racial dynamics in your marriage. How did your husband's family treat you? Were there cultural differences that caused ongoing conflict? Sarah Henderson, a petite blonde whose drawn expression hinted at months of strain, hesitated. Marcus's family's actually been very welcoming, she said quietly. His mother and I get along well. Our problems, they haven't really been about race. Victoria made a note on her legal pad, already calculating how to reframe that narrative. Mrs. Henderson, in my experience, interracial marriages often face unique pressures couples don't always recognize until the relationship begins to unravel. Let's explore whether racial or cultural differences may have played a subtler role. I really don't think race was the issue, Sarah insisted. Marcus has been working 70-hour weeks on a big project. I've been doing double shifts at the hospital. We barely saw each other. It was just life getting in the way. Victoria had heard these kinds of denials before. Clients often struggled to see how racial and cultural undercurrents shaped their relationships. But Victoria had become skilled at uncovering or manufacturing those dynamics, whether the couple recognized them or not. Tell me about your social circles, she pressed. Did you and your husband share the same friends? Were family gatherings comfortable? Did differences in cultural expectations around child rearing, gender roles, or finances cause tension? Victoria's questions grew increasingly pointed, seeking any thread of cultural conflict she could spin into legal leverage. As the conversation continued, Sarah described a marriage plagued by the usual modern pressures career demands, fading communication, and exhaustion. But Victoria knew how to recast ordinary marital problems as racial incompatibility for courtroom advantage. I want you to think carefully, Victoria said, her tone softening into something resembling empathy. Moments when you felt like an outsider. Maybe a comment from his family that seemed harmless but revealed deeper issues. Times cultural differences escalated a simple disagreement. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. There really haven't been many moments like that, she said. Marcus's family treats me like one of their own. We celebrate holidays together. They've supported us through hard times. Victoria jotted. Another note, Sarah's reluctance to attribute their marital issues to race. She'd encountered this before. White spouses in interracial marriages often minimized racial dynamics, either blind to their presence or unwilling to acknowledge them. Let me explain something about Illinois family law, Victoria said, adopting the measured tone of a seasoned educator. The court considers all factors contributing to a marriage's breakdown, including cultural incompatibility. and family conflict. If we can demonstrate that racial or cultural differences created irreconcilable problems, it strengthens your position on custody and asset division. The statement, while containing a sliver of truth, was crafted to mislead. Courts did weigh multiple factors, but Victoria's strategy aimed to exploit rather than address the complexities of race in relationships. As Sarah hesitantly continued discussing Marcus's commitment to their family and his efforts at reconciliation, Victoria's phone buzzed with a reminder about the upcoming cultural competency seminar she'd registered for. The notification included a brief bio of the speaker, Dr. David Washington, a marriage and family therapist specializing in multicultural relationships. Known for his work on the impact of societal racism on intimate partnerships, Victoria skimmed the information, barely listening as Sarah spoke. According to the seminar description, Dr. Washington believed interracial couples could thrive through better communication, community support, and addressing external racial pressures. It was an approach that directly challenged Victoria's entire professional playbook. Refocusing on her client, Victoria said, "Mrs. Henderson, I'd like you to start documenting instances where cultural differences surfaced, even subtly. Comments from his relatives, social situations where you felt out of place, parenting disagreements reflecting different values. But those things weren't really problems for us," Sarah protested. "Any disagreements we had were about normal parenting issues, not culture." "Let me handle the legal strategy," Victoria replied smoothly. "Your job is to provide me with anything that might support your case for full custody and a fair division of assets. Sometimes that means recognizing patterns you haven't noticed before." After Sarah left, Victoria reviewed her notes and began drafting a legal strategy built around fabricated racial tension. She would interview Sarah's friends and relatives, searching for anyone who'd voiced concerns about the interracial marriage. She'd dig into Marcus Henderson's career and social affiliations for anything that could be painted as divisive. Communication breakdowns and work-related stress would be repackaged as evidence of deeper racial and cultural incompatibility. It was a well-worn approach that had secured victories in dozens of similar cases. Later that afternoon, Victoria's assistant appeared at her office door. "Ms. Patterson, the Illinois State Bar Association called. Gay confirmed your attendance for next week's continuing ed seminar and mentioned Dr. Washington. Specifically requested a list of family law attorneys who registered." "Fine," Victoria replied, though she frowned slightly. Why would a marriage counselor care which divorce attorneys planned to attend a seminar on cultural competency? She suspected he intended to deliver a moral lecture about the damage adversarial divorces inflicted on multicultural families. The following week, the University of Chicago's Continuing Education Center buzzed with conversation as attorneys, mediators, and family law professionals gathered for the seminar. Victoria arrived precisely on time, wearing a sharply tailored business suit and carrying a briefcase that could double as a weapon. She claimed a seat in the back, intending to quietly review case files while earning her required credits. Around 40 professionals filled the room, most of whom Victoria recognized from court proceedings and bar association events. When Dr. David Washington entered, tall, poised, dressed in a navy sweater and khakis, he radiated the quiet assurance of a man utterly comfortable in his skin. "Good morning," he greeted the room warmly, instantly appending Victoria's expectations of a dry, obligatory lecture. "I'm David Washington, and today we're going to talk about cultural competency in family law. But before we get into theory, I'd like to start with a few statistics that may surprise you." He clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint slide appeared, showing data on interracial marriage rates, divorce outcomes, and custody battles in Illinois family courts. Victoria glanced up, mildly curious. Interracial couples in Illinois are 30% more likely to divorce than same-race couples, Dr. Washington began. "But," And this is important when we control for income levels, community support, and access to culturally competent counseling. That disparity nearly vanishes. Victoria frowned. The numbers clashed with her long-held assumptions about the inherent instability of interracial marriages. Dr. Washington continued, his tone firm but empathetic. The higher divorce rates among interracial couples aren't the result of innate incompatibility. They're the result of external stressors, family disapproval, social prejudice, lack of support networks, and, unfortunately, legal professionals who choose to exploit rather than address these challenges. Around the room, several attorneys shifted uneasily in their seats. Victoria felt targeted. Victoria felt specifically targeted by the comment, even though Dr. Washington hadn't made eye contact with her or singled out any participants. Let me show you a case study, he continued, clicking to the next slide. Marcus and Sarah Henderson, currently involved in divorce proceedings here in Chicago. Married 8 years, 2 children. No history of domestic violence or substance abuse. By all accounts, a loving couple facing typical marital stressors. Victoria's heart rate spiked. She immediately recognized the case, her client's case. She hadn't granted Dr. Washington permission to discuss the Henderson divorce, and she couldn't understand how he'd obtained information about ongoing legal proceedings. Dr. Washington continued, the Hendersons' marriage is ending not because of racial incompatibility, but because they never learned to navigate external racial stress as a team. When work, pressure, and communication problems emerged, they lacked the tools to manage these issues without letting racial dynamics complicate their resolution. Victoria stood abruptly from the back row. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "You're discussing a case that's currently in active litigation. How did you gain access to confidential information about my client's divorce proceedings?" Dr. Washington turned to look at her for the first time. His expression remained calm, despite her hostility. "I'm not discussing confidential information, Ms. Patterson," he replied evenly. "I'm referencing publicly available court filings and my own observations as the marriage counselor who worked with the Hendersons for 6 months before they decided to file for divorce." Victoria felt the heat rise in her face. She had interrupted a professional seminar to challenge information that was, apparently, both public and legitimate. She now appeared unprepared and defensive. Dr. Washington resumed, his tone remaining instructive rather than confrontational. "The Hendersons came to me when their marriage began experiencing stress. We made substantial progress, communication improved, work-life balance stabilized, but they discontinued therapy after legal proceedings began. When they were advised that counseling could complicate their case strategy, the implication was unmistakable. Victoria had advised Sarah Henderson to end therapy to support the legal argument that the marriage was irretrievably broken, standard strategy in contentious divorces. But here, Dr. Washington was framing it as short-sighted and potentially harmful. Another attorney raised a hand. "Are you suggesting that family law practitioners should encourage clients to continue therapy even when they've clearly stated their intent to divorce?" "I'm suggesting," Dr. Washington said carefully, "that attorneys should understand the difference between marriages that are genuinely incompatible and those struggling with external stressors that could be addressed through culturally competent intervention." He clicked to a new slide. Research on the impact of divorce on children in multicultural families. Children of interracial couples face unique identity challenges, even in intact households. When these families go through adversarial divorces that emphasize racial or cultural differences, the psychological damage can be profound and long. For the first time, Victoria found herself listening, not reviewing case files or checking her phone, but actually absorbing the presentation. Dr. Washington's research suggested that her standard litigation strategies might be hurting the very families she was hired to protect. "Let me share another perspective," Dr. Washington said, advancing to a slide showing quotes from children of divorced interracial parents. These are statements from kids whose parents' divorce proceedings focused on racial incompatibility. The quotes were devastating. I used to be proud that my parents came from different backgrounds. But after the divorce, I learned that race was why they couldn't stay together. Now I don't know if I should date people who look like mom more, people who look like dad. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Shame, guilt, something close to reckoning. She had never once considered the long-term emotional toll her legal strategies might take on the children caught in the crossfire. She raised her hand this time, calmly. Dr. Washington, what do you recommend when couples from different racial or cultural backgrounds experience legitimate conflicts that contribute to their marital breakdown? Excellent question, he said, nodding. His tone was genuine. Cultural differences can create stress, but they're rarely the core issue. More often, they're symptoms of larger communication breakdowns, clashing conflict styles, or external pressures that couples haven't learned to navigate together. As the seminar continued, Victoria's carefully constructed assumptions began to unravel. Dr. Washington presented case after case of interracial couples who had strengthened their relationships not by ignoring race, but by confronting racial stress as a shared external challenge, not an internal incompatibility. By the lunch break, she was experiencing something rare in her professional life: intellectual humility. Dr. Washington's work suggested that her success based on leveraging racial tensions in divorce cases might, in fact, reflect a profound misunderstanding of how multicultural families actually functioned. Lunch break. Victoria sat alone in the university cafeteria, staring at a salad. She wasn't eating, her mind spinning around her. Other attendees chatted in small groups, dissecting the morning's discussion, but Victoria felt too shaken to engage in casual conversation. Dr. David Washington approached her table with a sandwich and coffee in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I wanted to follow up on your question about cultural conflicts and multicultural marriages." She hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair. She wasn't sure she wanted to keep having a conversation that was steadily dismantling her sense of professional confidence, but she also wasn't ready to walk away from it. The next morning, Victoria sat across from Sarah Henderson in the firm's client consultation room, a space meticulously designed to radiate power and control. Law degrees, professional accolades, and photographs of Victoria with Chicago's political elite lined the walls. A silent but pointed reminder that this was where marriages came to be strategically dismantled. "Mrs. Henderson, I've reviewed your preliminary information," Victoria began, her voice cold and authoritative, the kind that made opposing counsel hesitate. "Let's talk about the racial dynamics in your marriage. How did your husband's family treat you? Were there cultural conflicts that caused ongoing strain?" Sarah, a petite blonde woman with the exhausted look of someone weathering months of marital tension, shook her head. "Marcus's family's always been kind to me. His mother and I have a great relationship. Honestly, race wasn't the problem." Victoria made a quiet note, already planning how to reposition the narrative. "In my experience, interracial marriages often face pressures couples don't fully recognize until things unravel. Let's explore the subtler ways race may have shaped your conflicts." "I don't think it was about race," Sarah insisted. "It was work stress, communication issues, Marcus working 70-hour weeks on a big project, me pulling doubles at the hospital. We just drifted apart." Victoria had heard this before, clients oblivious to how race and culture shaped their relationships, but she'd built her reputation on uncovering those dynamics, whether clients believed in them or not. "Tell me about your social circles," Victoria pressed. "Did you and your husband share the same friends? Were family gatherings comfortable? Were there expectations about gender roles or parenting styles that clashed?" Sarah's answers sketched out a marriage strained by modern pressures, career demands, neglected communication, dwindling time together. But Victoria knew how to turn ordinary problems into legal ammunition, framing them as evidence of racial and cultural incompatibility. "I want you to think carefully," Victoria said, "about times you felt like an outsider in your husband's world. Comments his family made that seemed harmless but reinforced racial divides. Moments when cultural differences sparked misunderstandings." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "There weren't really situations like that. His family treats me like one of their own. We celebrate holidays together. They've been incredibly supportive." Victoria made another note, this time about Sarah's resistance to acknowledging racial tension. She'd seen this pattern before. White spouses minimizing the role of race out of denial or discomfort, switching tactics. Victoria leaned into legal framing. Under Illinois law, the court considers all factors contributing to marital breakdown, including cultural incompatibility and family conflict. If we can demonstrate those dynamics existed, it strengthens your position for custody and asset division. It was only partially true, but persuasive. Victoria's phone buzzed with a seminar reminder. Next week's cultural competency training. The instructor, Dr. David Washington, specialized in working with multicultural couples and researching societal racism's impact on relationships. She skimmed his bio while Sarah spoke about Marcus's dedication to family and attempts at counseling. Apparently, Dr. Washington believed interracial couples could overcome racial stress with better communication and community support, a philosophy that directly contradicted Victoria's strategy. "Mrs. Henderson," Victoria said briskly, "I need you to start documenting incidents reflecting cultural differences. Comments from family, social discomfort, disagreements about parenting, anything that might signal incompatible values. But those weren't problems for us," Sarah protested. "Any disagreements were normal, not cultural." "Let me handle the legal strategy," Victoria replied. "Your job is to give me the facts that support your custody and financial claims. Sometimes that means recognizing patterns you didn't see before." After Sarah left, Victoria outlined a familiar plan. Interview friends and relatives for any reservations about the marriage. Investigate Marcus's professional and social circles for affiliations that could appear divisive, and reinterpret the couple's everyday conflicts as rooted in racial tension. It was a playbook she'd run dozens of times. She had no way of knowing that Dr. Washington had specifically requested the attendee list for the upcoming seminar. Having tracked patterns in how certain attorneys handled multicultural divorces, and flagged Victoria Patterson as particularly harmful to interracial families. At the seminar, Victoria arrived punctually, dressed in her most formidable business suit. She claimed a seat in the back row, intending to quietly review case files while clocking her mandatory continuing education hours. drwashingtons.com, confident presence immediately disarmed expectations. He opened with data on interracial marriages. Couples in Illinois were 30% more likely to divorce than same-race couples, but when adjusting for socioeconomic factors and access to culturally competent counseling, the disparity nearly vanished. Victoria frowned. The numbers challenged her core assumption that interracial marriages were inherently unstable. Dr. Washington explained it wasn't the relationship itself, but external pressures, family disapproval, discrimination, lack of community support, and the legal professionals who exploited those tensions that raised divorce rates. Several attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Victoria barely noticed. Later, Sarah returned to Victoria's office, noticeably calmer. "I think we've been looking at the wrong problems," she said. "Dr. Washington helped us see how we've been letting external pressures work. Family, social expectations, invade our marriage. Instead of facing those things together, we let them divide us." It was far more insight than Victoria had expected from a woman she'd dismissed as oblivious to racial dynamics. "He suggested we focus on dealing with racial stress as a team," Sarah added. Victoria felt a mixture of professional jealousy and curiosity. Mrs. Henderson, I need to be clear. Pursuing reconciliation could complicate your custody and asset claims. What if I don't want to fight for custody? Sarah asked softly. What if we can work out something better for our kids? Victoria hesitated. She built her career on adversarial divorces, not collaborative ones. They were less profitable, less dramatic, offered fewer courtroom victories. Collaborative divorce only works if both parties are acting in good faith, Marcus suggested. Sarah replied. He doesn't want our kids to grow up thinking our racial differences doomed our marriage. The words struck Victoria harder than she expected. After Sarah left, Victoria found herself browsing Dr. Washington's website, reading testimonials from couples who'd navigated racial stress through therapy. One line stood out. Loving across racial lines takes extra support, not less commitment. The problem isn't us, it's the world around us. Victoria realized she'd spent years treating racial differences as inevitable relationship fault lines, not external stressors couples might overcome together. Then came the call. Ms. Patterson. Thank you for taking my call, Dr. Washington said, his voice steady, measured. I wanted to discuss collaborating on the Henderson case. Victoria bristled. What kind of collaboration? They've asked about working toward reconciliation while preserving legal protections in case it doesn't succeed. Would your firm be open to that? Victoria surprised herself. I'd like to learn more. The following week, Victoria sat in Dr. Washington's warm, inviting Lincoln Park office, a space designed for openness, not power plays. She came prepared with legal pads and skepticism, but found herself listening more than writing. Marcus and Sarah never learned how to navigate racial stress as a team, Dr. Washington explained. When work, family, or society applied pressure, they turned on each other instead of standing together. They've been married 8 years, Victoria pointed out. If they were going to learn those skills, wouldn't they have by now? Not necessarily, he replied. Most interracial couples get no guidance about handling those challenges. They're expected to manage alone, and when they struggle, it's seen as evidence of incompatibility. He presented research success rates for multicultural couples who received culturally competent therapy. Many had reconciled when previously headed for divorce. What happens if they try this and it fails? Victoria asked. I can't risk my client's legal position. We document everything: therapy notes, progress assessments, intervention records. If it fails, you'll have a full record proving your client made a good faith effort to save the marriage. For the first time in her career, Victoria Patterson considered an approach to family law built not on adversarial tactics, but on healing. And she wasn't entirely sure it terrified her. The shift continues as their consultation wrapped up. Victoria realized something surprising. Dr. Washington's collaborative approach might not only strengthen her client's legal position, but also offer a more constructive outcome than the adversarial tactics she was accustomed to. Dr. Washington, she said, as she gathered her things, I have a personal question if that's okay. Of course. Do you think someone who's never been in an interracial relationship can effectively represent clients in multicultural divorce cases? It was a question that had been gnawing at her since their lunch conversation. She hadn't been able to shake. Dr. Washington paused, considering. I think someone who's never experienced racial stress in a relationship might have difficulty distinguishing between temporary challenges and permanent incompatibilities, he said carefully. But I also believe that awareness of that limitation is the first step toward developing better judgment. Victoria left his office with more questions than answers. For the first time in her career, she was seriously considering the possibility that her expertise might be incomplete, rather than comprehensive. A new approach that evening. She picked up the phone and called Sarah Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, Victoria began. A little uncertain. I've been consulting with Dr. Washington about your case. There was a pause on the line. Really? Sarah's voice carried cautious curiosity. If you're genuinely interested in attempting reconciliation, I'm open to exploring a collaborative approach, one that protects your legal interests while allowing therapy a chance to work. Wait, seriously? Sarah asked, her voice now edged with hope. I wasn't sure you'd support trying to save the marriage. Victoria felt a pang of guilt. Her previous legal advice had likely discouraged Sarah from even considering reconciliation. Mrs. Henderson, I want to make sure you understand both the benefits and risks of this approach, Victoria said. We can structure the process so that if therapy fails, divorce proceedings can resume without disadvantage. As they talked through the options, Victoria found herself asking questions she'd rarely considered before about what Sarah wanted for her family's future, not just what she hoped to extract from her husband. Toward the end of the call, Sarah asked quietly, Ms. Patterson, why the change of heart? Just yesterday you seemed certain reconciliation wasn't possible. Victoria hesitated. I learned some things about multicultural relationships, she said slowly, that made me realize my approach might have been incomplete. Aftermath. After the call, Victoria sat in her apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, staring out at the waves. It had been a long time since a single day had shaken her sense of professional identity so deeply. Her conversation with Dr. Washington had forced her to confront the possibility that her success had been built more on exploitation than on true understanding, particularly when it came to the complexities of interracial families. More troubling still was the growing awareness that her personal inexperience with racial dynamics and relationships might have compromised her ability to serve multicultural clients effectively. She had built a career on strategies she'd never questioned, based on assumptions she'd never tested. And now, for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't sure if her expertise was serving justice or simply reinforcing her own blind spots. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Dr. Washington, again, his quiet confidence, his deep knowledge, his empathetic approach. His methods were grounded not in intimidation, but in insight, not in domination, but in healing. For the first time in her legal career, Victoria wondered what it might feel like to build something rather than destroy it. Push back at the firm. By Thursday morning, the shift in Victoria's approach had not gone unnoticed at Patterson. Wells and Associates. Word had spread. The firm's most aggressive litigator was now experimenting with reconciliation, counseling, and collaborative divorce. Victoria, we need to talk, said Richard Wells, barging into her office without knocking. 68. Wells embodied the old guard ethos of family law, adversarial, expensive, and ruthlessly effective. What can I do for you, Richard? She asked, already bracing for a confrontation. I'm hearing troubling reports about how you're handling the Henderson case, he said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. Something about collaboration with the opposing party, encouraging reconciliation. Victoria felt her defenses rise. I'm exploring all options that serve my clients best. Interests including the possibility that reconciliation might offer a healthier outcome than a bitter divorce. Our reputation, Wells snapped, is built on winning contentious cases, not holding hands with marriage counselors. Maybe aggressive litigation isn't always what's best for our clients, Victoria said evenly. Maybe it's time we reconsider what winning really means. Wells's expression darkened. That's not your decision to make. Your job is to provide zealous advocacy within the adversarial system, not to play therapist. The conversation dragged on for another 20 minutes, with Wells making it clear that her new approach was viewed as professionally irresponsible and potentially damaging to the firm's reputation. He ended by strongly suggesting she reconsider her recent decisions if she still hoped for partnership. Family fallout. Later that afternoon, Victoria faced an even more personal challenge when her mother called. Victoria, Eleanor Patterson began without preamble. Margaret Whitfield called me with very disturbing news. Victoria sighed. Of course the country club grapevine had kicked into full gear. She says you're working with some black therapist on a case involving interracial marriage. Is that true? Mother, I'm collaborating with a licensed marriage counselor on a complex case. His race is irrelevant to his professional qualifications. Of course it's relevant, dear, Eleanor said briskly. People are saying things that you're spending time with this man outside of professional contexts, that you're becoming overly emotional about cases involving mixed marriages, that you might be compromising your objectivity. Victoria clenched her jaw. The suggestion that her professional partnership was being misinterpreted through racial and, possibly romantic lenses, revealed everything she already knew about her mother's world. Dr. Washington is a respected expert in multicultural therapy. My work with him is based on expertise, not personal involvement. Well, your father and I are concerned. This new experimental phase, these associations, with people outside our circle. It's not like you. Maybe it's exactly like me, Victoria said quietly, echoing the words she'd once used when defending the nonprofit foundation she supported. Maybe I've been hiding parts of myself to fit your expectations. The conversation ended, with Eleanor insisting that Victoria attend Saturday's fundraiser at the country club to rehabilitate her image. It felt suffocating. But Victoria agreed, not because she wanted to, because she wasn't ready yet to fight her family and her firm at the same time. The next morning, Victoria received a call from Dr. Washington. Victoria, I wanted to let you know that Marcus and Sarah have made significant progress in therapy this week, he said. Marcus shared that they're beginning to understand how external racial stress affected their communication, and they're developing healthier ways to support each other. That's good news, Victoria replied, though a strange unease crept in. Part of her wondered whether therapeutic success was a professional victory, or a threat to the foundations of her practice. There's something else, Dr. Washington added gently. Sarah mentioned you've been getting pressure from your firm and family about our collaboration. I hope it's not creating difficulties for you. Victoria was caught off guard. She hadn't expected Sarah to bring office politics into therapy. It's nothing I can't handle, she said, a little too briskly. Some people are uncomfortable with collaborative approaches in family law. It's more than that, isn't it? Dr. Washington asked, his tone kind but direct. People are uncomfortable with the idea of a white attorney working closely with a black therapist on interracial marriage cases. The truth of it stung. Victoria hesitated. There may be some social dynamics at play, she admitted carefully. Can I ask you something personal? His use of her first name added a note of unexpected intimacy. Go ahead. Are you prepared for the possibility that changing how you practice multicultural family law might mean changing other parts of your life too? The question landed harder than she expected. Victoria realized she'd been avoiding this very thought, that her evolving professional values were tangled up with personal loyalties, social relationships, and family expectations. I don't know, she answered. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what this change means for my career, let alone my personal life. That's fair, Dr. Washington said. Change is complicated, especially when it means confronting systems and relationships that shaped your identity. After the call ended, Victoria sat in her apartment, feeling caught between two worlds. The elite legal and social circles that built her career, and the emerging sense of justice and healing she was discovering through her work with Dr. Washington. The tension felt increasingly unsustainable, but she wasn't yet sure which world she was willing to leave behind. That Saturday evening, Victoria attended a fundraiser at the Lake Forest Country Club, dressed in a black cocktail dress and her grandmother's pearls. She moved among Chicago's legal and social elite, the same people she'd known all her adult life. Victoria "Darling, you look lovely tonight," gushed Margaret Whitfield as she arrived with her son, Jonathan. "I was just telling Jonathan about your successful practice and your commitment to family values." Dr. Jonathan Whitfield was every inch the man Victoria's mother had been steering her toward for years. Handsome, wealthy, professionally accomplished, and entirely conventional. "Miss Patterson," Jonathan greeted her smoothly. "I've heard impressive things about your work in family law. Mother tells me you specialize in high-conflict divorce cases." "That's correct," Victoria replied, though the description of her work now felt faintly uncomfortable. "I handle complex dissolutions involving significant assets and custody disputes." As the evening unfolded, Victoria noticed the unspoken assumptions woven into the conversations around her. Comments about those people, cultural problems, and urban crime rates peppered discussions on politics and education. The casual racism of people insulated from difference. "I heard you're working on an interesting case involving an interracial couple," remarked Elizabeth Crawford, the wife of a judge and a notorious social gossip. "Mixed marriages are so complicated, all those cultural clashes and family disapproval issues." Victoria felt her cheeks flush. She realized, with some horror, that the Henderson case was being dissected as dinner party gossip. "Actually," Victoria replied steadily, "I'm learning that many of the challenges interracial couples face come from societal prejudice, rather than inherent incompatibility." A brief, awkward silence followed. "Well, of course, societal factors play a role," Elizabeth replied with a forced smile. "But surely, there are fundamental cultural differences that create ongoing tension in those marriages." "What kind of differences?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious what specific conflicts Elizabeth assumed existed. Elizabeth hesitated. "You know, values around family, money, work ethic, different expectations about communication." In that moment, Victoria realized Elizabeth's views, and by extension much of her social circles, were shaped by stereotypes, not real understanding. And disturbingly, they echoed some of the assumptions Victoria herself had built her practice around. "Actually," Victoria said, "research shows that most of the difficulties for interracial couples come from external pressures, discrimination, family disapproval, lack of community support, not because they're fundamentally incompatible." Jonathan, listening nearby, leaned in with genuine interest. "That's fascinating, Victoria. Where did you come across that research? I'd like to read more about multicultural psychology." Victoria found herself talking about Dr. Washington's work, his evidence-based methods, the way his therapy reframed racial stress as an external problem couples could tackle together. "Sounds like he's doing important work," Jonathan remarked. "Cultural psychology's becoming essential in medicine too, as our patient populations get more diverse. I'd be interested in meeting him." Victoria was surprised by his open-mindedness, a sharp contrast to the thinly veiled skepticism she often encountered in her circle. "He's an extraordinary clinician," she agreed. "Working with him has completely reshaped how I approach multicultural cases." As the evening wore on, Victoria found herself defending these new ideas. Two colleagues and acquaintances, some, like Jonathan, responded with curiosity. Others, like Elizabeth Crawford, bristled at the challenge to their worldview. During dinner, seated among young professionals, the conversation shifted to Chicago's changing demographics. "This city's becoming so diverse," complained David Harrison, a corporate attorney from a rival firm. "It's tough navigating all the sensitivities and political correctness these days." "What kind of challenges?" Victoria asked, echoing one of Dr. Washington's techniques. "Always ask for specifics. You know, making sure you don't offend anyone, dealing with different cultural expectations, avoiding discrimination lawsuits," David replied with a shrug. "It's easier when everyone comes from the same background." It wasn't lost on Victoria that David's so-called challenges were really complaints about having to treat people from different backgrounds with fairness and decency. His preference for similar backgrounds was simply code for wanting to work with white, wealthy clients who wouldn't question his assumptions. I've found that working with diverse clients actually makes me better at what I do, Victoria said, thinking of her recent cases with Dr. Washington. Different perspectives help me see problems and solutions I might otherwise miss. David looked skeptical. I'd think cultural differences would complicate professional relationships. They add complexity, sure, but they also bring insight. It's not a liability, it's an asset, Victoria replied, surprised at how naturally the words came. By the end of the night, Victoria felt emotionally drained from the effort of navigating conversations that exposed the casual prejudice of a world she'd once comfortably belonged to. Those assumptions, once invisible to her, now felt glaringly obvious and increasingly unacceptable. As guests prepared to leave, Jonathan Whitfield approached her. "I really enjoyed our conversation tonight, Victoria," he said. "Would you be interested in continuing it over dinner sometime this week?" Victoria studied him, handsome, accomplished, polite, and, surprisingly, open-minded. Everything her family wanted for her, yet somehow not enough. "I'd like that," she replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something she couldn't yet name. Later, as she drove home through Chicago's glowing skyline, Victoria found herself thinking about Dr. Washington, wondering what kinds of events he attended, what his friends were like, and whether his personal and professional worlds felt as conflicted as hers had become. David had chosen the venue, and Victoria appreciated how well he understood spaces that conveyed success and sophistication. "I've been reading some of Dr. Washington's work since our conversation Saturday night," Jonathan said, over a glass of wine that costs more than most people's weekly grocery bill. "His research on multicultural relationship therapy is truly groundbreaking. I'd love to bring some of his insights into my own practice at Northwestern." Victoria felt a quiet satisfaction. Jonathan's genuine intellectual engagement stood in stark contrast to the dismissiveness she'd encountered from her family and colleagues. "He's made me reconsider a lot of assumptions," she admitted, "not just about interracial relationships, but about the impact of external stressors in marriage. He's also challenged my approach to family law. Shifting from an adversarial to a collaborative model is a big philosophical change," Jonathan noted as their conversation deepened. Victoria realized that Jonathan grasped the full professional weight of the transition she was exploring. He asked thoughtful questions about her work with Dr. Washington and seemed sincerely interested in the therapeutic strategies that were helping the Henderson family. "Jonathan, can I ask you something personal?" Victoria asked as their interviewees arrived, of course. "Have you ever dated someone from a different racial background?" Jonathan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Actually, yes. I dated a Korean-American pediatrician during my residency. She was an incredible physician, but her family was very traditional. They didn't approve of interracial relationships." "What happened?" Victoria asked. "We broke up after about 8 months. The pressure from her family became overwhelming, and honestly, I wasn't mature enough to handle it. I didn't know how to support her through that." His honesty surprised her. "Do you regret how it ended?" "I regret not fighting harder for the relationship," Jonathan said. "I let outside pressure dictate our future instead of focusing on what we meant to each other." Victoria was struck by his emotional awareness, something rare in her social circle. His willingness to admit fault and reflect on past mistakes showed a depth of character she hadn't expected. As they shared dessert, Victoria found herself opening up about her own romantic history, relationships with men who had always fit seamlessly into her world. White, wealthy, professionally accomplished, but none of them had ever challenged her to grow or examine her assumptions. "I've never dated anyone who wasn't part of my world," she admitted. "I'm starting to realize my romantic life has been as limited as my professional worldview." "Limited in what way?" Jonathan asked. I've chosen safety over challenge, comfort over growth, and social approval over genuine connection. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's honest. What's making you reconsider now? Victoria thought of Dr. What. Their collaboration had forced her to confront her biases and question what she thought she knew. Working with David has made me realize how much I don't know about interracial relationships, about cultural dynamics, about myself. Are you attracted to him? Jonathan asked plainly. The question stopped her cold. She hadn't let herself fully consider it, but now the truth surfaced. It's complicated. He's intelligent, compassionate, accomplished, and, yes, I'm drawn to him. But he also represents everything my family would find unacceptable. He's black, from a different background, and he's focused on healing, not winning. A relationship with him would challenge every expectation I've ever followed. Jonathan was quiet, then spoke gently. When I was with Dr. Kim, I learned that the most meaningful relationships often require choosing love over social convenience. I didn't have the courage to make that choice, and I've regretted it ever since. Are you saying I should pursue something with David? Victoria asked. I'm saying you should be honest with yourself about what you want and why. Don't let other people's expectations define your life. As they left the restaurant and walked to the valet, Victoria felt grateful for Jonathan's understanding and his lack of jealousy about her feelings for someone else. Thank you for dinner, she said, and for listening without judgment. Thank you for your honesty, Jonathan replied. I hope you find the courage to make choices based on your own values. Driving home through the quiet Chicago streets, Victoria felt a sense of clarity. Jonathan was everything her family wanted for her: intelligent, successful, polished. But her growing attraction to Dr. Washington represented something very different. The possibility of a relationship built on authenticity, shared values, and mutual growth. The next morning, she called Dr. Washington to update him on the Henderson case, but their conversation naturally shifted. David, can I ask you something personal? She began. Of course. Do you think someone from my background can truly understand multicultural relationship dynamics? Or will I always be limited by my lack of personal experience? There was a pause. Understanding requires both intellectual effort and emotional growth, he said finally. The real question is, are you willing to do both? What would emotional growth look like in this context? It would mean being willing to face what multicultural couples face: social pressure, family disapproval, cultural differences, not just as an observer, but in your own life. Victoria's heart raced. She took a breath. David, would you be open to helping me understand those challenges firsthand? Another pause. Are you asking me out? He asked gently. I'm asking if you'd be open to exploring whether our professional connection could become something more personal, she replied, surprising herself with her honesty. Yes, he said simply. I'd like that very much. As she hung up, Victoria knew she had just made a choice that would upend every social expectation placed on her. It was terrifying and completely liberating. That Friday evening, she found herself in Bronzeville, a neighborhood she'd never visited, meeting Dr. Washington for dinner at a place called Pearl's Place. The neighborhood was rich in culture and history, a vibrant center of black life in Chicago that she'd ignored for most of her adult life. Pearl's Place was cozy and full of life. The scent of Southern comfort food filled the air, mingling with jazz music and laughter. Victoria was one of the few white patrons, and for the first time in a long time, she felt aware of her own visibility. David greeted her at a corner table, dressed in a casual sweater and jeans. He looked relaxed and warm. Thanks for coming, he said, pulling out her chair. I wanted to share one of my favorite spots with you. It's lovely, she said, glancing around at the room's welcoming, lived-in charm. I can't believe I've never been here. Bronzeville has incredible history, he explained as they sat. It was the epicenter of Chicago's Black cultural renaissance, home to artists, musicians, entrepreneurs. This community has created so much under enormous pressure. As David shared the stories of Bronzeville's past, Victoria realized how narrow her view of Chicago had been. Despite 3 decades in the city, she'd never stepped beyond the boundaries of her privileged bubble. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said, as they waited for their meal. "Of course. What was it like growing up black in Chicago? What did your family face that I might not understand?" David smiled thoughtfully. "It's a big question. My parents are both college educated. My dad's an engineer, my mom's a teacher, so we had financial stability. But we still faced discrimination in housing, education, even simple day-to-day things. I learned early that being twice as good only got you half as far." As he spoke, Victoria felt the weight of her own unacknowledged privilege. "I'm realizing now how blind I was to the challenges my multicultural clients face," she said. "I thought I understood, but I was seeing their experiences through the lens of my own comfort." "That's why we worked well together," David said. "You brought legal clarity. I brought cultural insight. Together, we saw the whole picture." Their meals arrived rich, soulful food that was as nourishing as the conversation. And for the first time, Victoria wasn't just learning. She was beginning to understand. The evening at the restaurant felt different from the formal dinners Victoria was accustomed to. As they shared peach cobbler for dessert, their conversation drifted from professional topics to personal histories, family backgrounds, and past relationships. "Victoria," David said, setting down his fork, "can I ask you something that might be a little uncomfortable?" "Go ahead," she replied, curious. "What are you hoping to get out of this relationship? Are you looking for personal growth, professional collaboration, or something else?" The question caught Victoria off guard, forcing her to reflect on her own motivations. "Honestly," she admitted, "I think I'm looking for authenticity. Every relationship I've had has been shaped by social expectations, not genuine connection. You challenge me to see things differently, to question assumptions I've carried my entire life." David nodded thoughtfully. "And what about the social cost? Dating me is going to impact your relationships with your family, your colleagues, your standing in your circle. Are you prepared for that?" Victoria had tried not to think about those consequences, but now she couldn't avoid them. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But what I do know is that making romantic choices to please other people hasn't made me happy or helped me grow." After dinner, they walked together through Bronzeville's tree-lined streets. Victoria found herself noticing the neighborhood with new eyes, its beauty, cultural richness, and vitality defying the stereotypes she'd unconsciously absorbed about predominantly black communities. "David," she said as they reached her car, "would you be willing to come to a social event in my world? My firm's holiday party is next week, and I'd like you to come as my date." David smiled, though a flicker of concern crossed his face. "Are you sure you're ready for that? Bringing me into that environment will attract attention and gossip." "I'm sure," Victoria replied, though her pulse quickened at the thought of what awaited them. "If I'm going to change how I approach relationships, I need to be willing to live those changes publicly." The following week, Victoria prepared herself mentally for the firm's holiday party. She expected curiosity, judgment, and possible professional repercussions, but she was determined to be honest about her relationship with David. The party was held at the Chicago History Museum, drawing the city's legal elite for an evening of networking and celebration. When Victoria arrived with David on her arm, she felt the immediate ripple of attention their pairing drew. "Victoria, I'd like you to meet someone," said senior partner Richard Wells, approaching with a tight smile. "This is Judge Harrison, from the Circuit Court." "Judge, this is Victoria Patterson, one of our firm's rising stars." Victoria introduced David as her partner, noting Wells' barely concealed discomfort. To her surprise, Judge Harrison engaged David in a thoughtful conversation about multicultural therapy and its relevance in family court cases. Throughout the evening, Victoria encountered the full spectrum of reactions David had predicted. Some colleagues expressed genuine interest in David's work and seemed at ease with their relationship. Others remained politely distant, clearly uneasy but too discreet to voice their prejudices. A few couldn't help making thinly veiled comments about interracial relationships and David's motives for dating a wealthy white attorney. Ms. Patterson came the familiar voice of Elizabeth Crawford, the judge's wife, who'd long presided over country club gossip circles. "Your friend seems very charming. How did you two meet?" Victoria noted the careful choice of friend rather than boyfriend or partner. "David and I are collaborating on multicultural family law cases," she replied evenly. "How interesting," Elizabeth said, her tone patronizing. "I suppose it's helpful to have cultural consultants for those types of cases." It was a revealing exchange. For people in Victoria's world, it seemed nearly impossible to imagine an interracial relationship rooted in attraction, compatibility, and mutual respect, rather than professional convenience or social experimentation. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria felt the weight of what her decision meant. Publicly dating David had shifted her social and professional standing in ways she would need to navigate moving forward. But she also felt a quiet pride in choosing authenticity over comfort. "How do you feel about tonight?" David asked as they drove through the glittering streets of downtown Chicago. "Anxious," Victoria admitted, "but committed. I know this relationship will challenge me in ways I've never experienced, and I also know it's the first romantic choice I've made based on a real connection, not what other people expect of me." David reached for her hand. "I want you to know something, Victoria. I'm with you because of who you are, not what you represent or what dating you might mean for me professionally." His reassurance meant more to her than she could express. Victoria hadn't realized the insecurities she'd developed about David's motivations until now. As they reached her apartment, she felt like she was closing one chapter of her life and stepping into a new one that valued authentic connection over social acceptance, personal growth over professional ease, and love over mere comfort. How's the story hitting you so far? Tell us in the comments. If you're loving it, type 1. If not, type 0. We want to hear your thoughts. 3 months into their relationship, Victoria and David had settled into a rhythm, one that tested both of them daily. Victoria was learning to navigate predominantly black social spaces, often as the only white person in the room. Meanwhile, David was adjusting to the scrutiny that came with dating a wealthy, white attorney from Chicago's legal elite. The learning curve was steepened, often uncomfortable. Victoria realized her presence in David's social circles sometimes caused tension. Some of his friends and colleagues questioned whether her interest was sincere, or if she was using the relationship as a way to experiment with interracial dating for personal growth rather than genuine love. On the flip side, David encountered assumptions from Victoria's social and professional networks. Many speculated he was benefiting from the relationship, leveraging it for professional clout or financial advantage. "It gets exhausting sometimes," Victoria confessed one Saturday morning as they walked along the Lake Michigan shoreline, "constantly managing what everyone else thinks about us, while still trying to figure out what we think." "Welcome to the reality of every interracial couple," David replied with gentle humor. "The difference is, most people in your position have the option to retreat into a more racially homogeneous relationship when the pressure gets too intense." That struck Victoria. She realized her privilege allowed her to view these challenges as temporary hurdles, while for David, navigating racial dynamics in both relationships and professional life was an everyday experience, not just a teachable moment. "I want to ask you something that might be hard to answer," she said as they settled on a bench overlooking the water. "Go ahead. Do you think I'm really capable of being a true partner in an interracial relationship? Or am I just someone exploring something new, someone who might retreat when things get too uncomfortable? The question had been sitting heavy on her chest for weeks, especially as pressure from colleagues and family mounted. David took a moment before replying. I think you can be a real partner, but I also think you're still learning what that really means. The bigger question is, will you keep learning, even when the lessons get harder? Before she could respond, Victoria's phone buzzed. It was a call from her firm. The caller ID read, Richard Wells. She hesitated, then answered, Victoria. We have a problem, Richard began without preamble. The Illinois State Bar has received a formal complaint about your handling of the Henderson case. It alleges that your relationship with Dr. Washington created a conflict of interest that compromised your representation. Victoria's stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? Who filed it? They're accusing you of recommending reconciliation, therapy with Dr. Washington, for personal reasons, implying that your romantic involvement affected your legal judgment. As she processed the implications, it hit her. Someone had weaponized her relationship with David to question her ethics and professionalism. Richard, the outcome of that case was overwhelmingly positive, she said. The couple avoided a destructive divorce and is now rebuilding their marriage together. That's not the issue, he replied. The mere appearance of impropriety is enough to damage your reputation and the firm's. After the call ended, Victoria sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing in. David looked at her, waiting. Someone filed an ethics complaint, she said quietly. They're using our relationship to argue that I mishandled the Henderson case. David's face grew serious. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never intended for our relationship to put your career in jeopardy. This isn't your fault, she said firmly. This is about people being uncomfortable with what we represent: interracial love, a non-traditional approach to family law, and the idea that empathy can be part of legal practice. As they talked, Victoria realized she was facing a choice: protect her career by distancing herself from David, or defend both her integrity and their relationship publicly. I need to ask you something important, she said. Will you? Stand by me if I choose to fight this complaint rather than back away from our relationship. David looked surprised, but answered without hesitation. Of course I'll support you, but, are you sure? You could be risking everything. I'm sure I want to risk everything for what's right, she replied. This isn't just about meats, about challenging the idea that interracial relationships are inherently suspect or unethical. It's about standing up for truth and love. The following Monday, Victoria sat down with the firm's ethics counsel and made her decision clear. I'm going to fight this complaint publicly, she told Richard Wells and the senior partners. The Henderson case produced an excellent outcome for all parties, and my relationship with Dr. Washington enhanced, not compromised, my legal judgment. Fighting this publicly could damage your reputation and ours, Wells warned. Then maybe it's time the firm decides, Victoria replied, her voice steady. Does it support attorneys who challenge outdated norms in family law and social relationships, or does it prefer the safety of tradition? Her words created the confrontation she'd long feared, forcing the firm to either stand with her evolution or retreat into the comfort of convention as word of the ethics. Complaints spread through legal circles and media outlets. Victoria found herself at the center of a much larger conversation about interracial relationships in professional spaces, about collaborative approaches to family law, and about what happens when the personal and professional collide. Victoria, David said one evening as they prepared dinner together, you know this could change everything, right? She met his gaze. I know, and I'm ready. In the face of what would likely be weeks of public scrutiny and professional challenges, David asked quietly, are you sure you're ready for this fight? I'm sure I'm ready to stop hiding who I am and what I believe, Victoria replied firmly. If our relationship can't survive public scrutiny, it was never strong enough to last. But if it can, then maybe we're building something truly meaningful. The Illinois State Bar Association's hearing room felt both imposing and intimate. Its high ceilings, amplifying the soft shuffle of papers and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Judge Patricia Morrison presided from behind a polished wooden bench, the official state seal gleaming on the wall behind her. Victoria Patterson, Washington, stood poised in the center, her tailored charcoal suit sharp against the dark mahoganies. Every element in the room, from the muted carpeting to the deep green leather chairs, radiated tradition and authority. After a lengthy review, Judge Morrison spoke, her voice clear and steady. We find no evidence of misconduct in Ms. Patterson Washington's handling of the Henderson case. A collective breath of relief swept through the room. Victoria felt the tension in her shoulders ease as the judge continued. Her collaboration with Dr. Washington produced innovative outcomes that prioritized the family's well-being. From the front row, Sarah Henderson rose, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you for giving us hope," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not just legal advice, but real hope." Marcus stood beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just protect our assets, you helped save our marriage." Later that morning, sunlight streamed through the glass doors of Patterson and Washington family law. Their new name gleamed on the frosted window pane. Victoria unlocked the front door, feeling the significance of the moment. Inside, the hallway walls were lined with photographs of reconciled couples, captured moments of laughter, relief, renewed vows, proof that advocacy and healing could coexist. Dr. Washington appeared at her side, a warm smile on his face and a steaming latte in hand. "Ready for our first morning here together?" he asked. "Absolutely," Victoria replied, slipping her arm through his. That afternoon, they co-led their first official workshop in a packed lecture hall. A young attorney raised her hand, eager. "How do we balance legal strategy with therapeutic recommendations?" Dr. Washington answered with calm authority. "By documenting every intervention, therapy note, and progress report, so that legal protections remain intact while addressing the family's deeper needs." Across the room, a judge murmured approvingly, "This is the kind of change our courts have been waiting for." As dusk fell over Lake Michigan that evening, Victoria and David stood together on their balcony, the city lights sparkling below them. David raised his glass. "To love that builds rather than breaks." Victoria smiled, heart full, and lifted her glass to meet his. Two bridges, not barriers. 3 months later, at a historic Bronzeville gallery, a diverse, joyful crowd gathered for the firm's anniversary fundraiser. Guests shared stories of reconciliation, laughter, and hope. A young boy tugged at Victoria's sleeve. She knelt to meet his gaze. "Thank you for saving my family," he said softly. Victoria's throat tightened as she smiled at him, feeling the weight and worth of every choice that had led her here.